our initial conversation are all about the things that are commoditized and that the marketplace at large are doing.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I am your host, Nick Olsen. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast. My guest today is the founder of Levy Innovation, a firm that helps organizations and thought leaders differentiate themselves by what he calls a big, sexy idea. The ideas Mark and his clients have created are known worldwide by hundreds of millions of people. He has consulted some of the world's most prominent companies and individuals, including the CEO of Popeyes, the former head of strategy unit at Harvard Business School, and Simon Sinek. In 2018, he was also elected into the $1 Million Consulting Hall of Fame. He is a keynote speaker where he's spoken on strategy to companies like Adobe, American Express, and Google. He's a member of the National Speakers Association and has written or co-authored 5 books. Also a magician himself. I'd love to dive into that. Please welcome my guest today, Mark Levy. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nick. I appreciate it.
All right. So that's like one of the longest intros ever. So you obviously...
And you cut it down.
It's probably not even a quarter of what I could have said.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, really looking forward to our conversation here today. And so just for our listeners' purpose, that was a brief introduction, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and the great work that you do.
Oh, well, yes, thank you. So I'm a differentiation expert. So it's about picking out the thing from your business that's going to make people remember you and make you stand out in a crowd and get them excited about who you are and what it is you can do for them, and gets them talking about who you are and what you can do for them, even when you're not around. Because to me, a very important part of differentiation, or a big sexy idea, the way I call it, is that it's so important to people in their lives for some reason. It doesn't even have to be profound, but it's important to them that it actually gets conversation going, even when they're at the bar or something like that. It's like, oh, you won't believe this company or this guy or something like that. And then they talk about something.
What got you into this, wanting to talk about differentiation? And because I think, regardless of what you do professionally or personally, like that idea of how to differentiate yourself in a crowded space is beneficial for us all.
Oh, yeah. So it's the classic story of you get interested in something that you're very poor at. Or to put it differently, sometimes we go towards strengths and sometimes we go towards weaknesses. So when I was a kid, I was extremely shy, like painfully shy. But I also like to do magic tricks. I like to write. I like to do things that needed an audience. And so the idea of being able to stand out in an important way in a room full of important strangers was a terrifying, yet I knew important thing for me. So I started to learn how ideas or how people were able to stand out without being obnoxious, like standing out in a justifiable way. And so along with this, I became the director of the third largest book wholesaler in North America. I helped them sell over $1 billion worth of books at a time when books were very inexpensive. So that was hard to do. And so it was predominantly phone sales. And what it was books would come in. We'd buy millions of dollars worth of books from Random House, Simon Schuster, Doubleday, like all these different publishers. And they'd come in every day on tractor trailers that would back up with the beep, beep, beep to our warehouse. And then these giant skids of thousands of books, high-lows, would pull them out. They were all shrink wrapped together. And then I would climb up these things with a box cutter, like climb up like 12 feet high, like a bunch of, and I'd start cutting things open. This was 30 years ago or so. So I'd cut these things open and I'd see what new books had arrived. And then I'd have to jump off the skids, run into the sales room and tell my staff, here are the new books that came in. Here's what they're about. Here's what I think we should sell. Here's what we shouldn't sell, regardless of whether the publisher, like, here's a book that I think warrants being sold, and here's a book that they think should sell, but I don't think so. Anyway, so I had to then jump on the phone and sell the stuff. And so I would begin the call with no money, and I'd have to end with $2,000 or $20,000 worth of sales. And I did that over and over again for over a decade. And so over the decade, I did about 25,000 over, but I'm underestimating with this, but 25,000 live pitches for money, where I'd start with no money and I'd have to end up with money at the end. And so when you do that a lot, so remember, I was super interested in what's the core thing here? How do you make something stand out in a justifiable way? Because I had been so shy, but then I got over that. Now I'm the opposite. I need to go to a workshop to make me more shy than I actually am, rather than. And so then it became talking about books and what they were about and the ideas and the story and the color with them, and then using them to ring the register, as we'd say. And so after I had done that for years, I left that job and I just opened up my own practice. It had just nothing to do with books. But what I do, Nick, is I look at a business. It can be an enormous business, a billion-dollar business. Like you've heard, I've worked with major organizations, but I also work with individuals and smaller companies and so forth. And I kind of look at what it is that they're doing as if it were a book, right? It's not a book, but I look at it as if it was a book. And I say, what is the book, quote unquote, that Nick has written with his business life so far? What are the main ideas? What are the ancillary ideas? What are the stories? If we moved an idea to the fore of his quote unquote book, would it be a better seller? And how would I pitch it on the phone to make money? And that's all I do. I teach my clients how to do that.
That's amazing. So that thing, that differentiator, that is your big sexy idea. Is that, don't you explain how you came up with that name and what that means in more detail?
Oh, yeah. I came up with the big sexy idea, that moniker, many years ago. You know, it's trademarked and so forth. I just did it. I was just writing, because I'm a writer. I was just writing about what I did one day, and it just came up in my writing. Somehow I just started to write about it. And someone who I trust very much read what I had written. They said, oh, I love that. And so I started to use it. And a very important point there, Nick, is that I didn't start my business with that concept. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know I was in the differentiation business. That came years later. I was just helping people sell things.
Yeah.
But the point is that your top of mind thinking is probably the thinking that's keeping you stuck. So I'm saying that about the big sexy idea thing. I had to burn through lots of ordinary thinking of mine in order to get to something really interesting. And so I find that when businesses come to me, like advisory business or product businesses, doesn't matter, that invariably our initial conversation are all about the things that are commoditized and that the marketplace at large are doing. And so that's the stuff that I need to know about, but I know it's the stuff that we're going to reject, because you can't do anything that the rest of your marketplace is doing. Otherwise, you just seem like a copycat. And I mean, related to that, if I can continue for a second, because I think this is one of the most important points that I have to say. In order to differentiate your business forcefully, whatever your business is, it's important that you get a little illogical about things. Because when people think about differentiating their business, when they come to me with their points of differentiation, I almost always find this stuff awful. I'm very supportive. I don't say it like that, but I say, we can do better.
Yeah.
It's almost always awful. And it's because people have tried to stay too logical that they haven't done this intentionally, but they're essentially saying, we need to stand out. Let me look at what the marketplace says is important. And then they differentiate around like some vague thing based on what other people were thinking. So like if they released a product that's red, we're going to make ours blue. Or if theirs is 500 horsepower, we'll make ours 600 horsepower. Like it's some vague thing that's not memorable at all. That it's essential that you go way beyond the confines of what your industry is. A quick story to illustrate this point. It's a product story, but years ago, there was a soft drink company in Europe, and they were a cola company, and they wanted to come to America and rival Coca-Cola. This is like 15 years ago or so. And so they came here, and before they released their cola in America, they had a blind taste test done by an American company. And the American company said, we've been doing this for 10 years and we've never seen a product test so badly as your product. As a matter of fact, here's a Wordle, here's a word cloud. And as you can see, we did it with lots of people. The most common word that came up about the taste of your cola was the word disgusting. That people thought that was the knee-jerk reaction. This is disgusting. They think it's clawing. It's like they just hate it. And so the European company knew they would never be able to compete with Coca-Cola on a flavor level. And even if they changed the flavor of their cola, Coca-Cola was too entrenched. And so the logical thing is a cola has no benefit other than flavor. That's it. There's no other benefit. It's not like medicinal or anything like that. So if they stayed with logic, that would be horrible for them. So instead they said, okay, what do we have? We can't compete on the logical thing, which is taste. What else can we do with our cola? And their cola had a lot of caffeine, an enormous amount of caffeine in it. And so they decided to create a category which at the time had never existed before. And this was 15, 20 years ago, never existed. So they created a category called energy drinks, brand new category. No one had heard of it before. And it was because of the caffeine. And they said, let's change the name of our cola to something that goes along with energy drinks. Let's call our cola Red Bull, which in bullfighting, that's when you stab a bull and it's still alive and very strong, but now it's seeing red. It's really angry. So it's at its most volatile. So let's call Red Bull. Let's not serve our cola in 2-liter containers because we want to get the idea that there's so much power in this that's like nitroglycerin. So you wouldn't give someone a 2-liter of nitroglycerin. Let's put it in small cans and metal cans that are hard to crush. And let's talk about like the idea that you fly from this. Let's say Red Bull, it gives you wings. And as a matter of fact, let's not sponsor standard things like football and whatnot. Let's do extreme sports. And we'll have our own extreme sports tournaments and magazines and so, like cliff diving. And as a matter of fact, let's do publicity stunts. But like skydiving, that's old hat. Let's have someone skydive from outer space. Let's have them fly up to out of outer space and jump in a parachute. So that's how Red Bull became Red Bull. It's because they looked at what was illogical. If they stayed logical, it would have been about taste. You would have never heard of them today. Yeah. And it's the same thing. I told you I like to tell stories, right? Yep. It's the same thing about anyone listening to this, that whatever it is you're doing, it needs to be about something different than is currently thought of as correct. Because if you go the correct route, you're just going to blend in.
Yeah. That's an amazing example. As you were telling the story, I'm like, it dawned on me, like, the taste, the energy, like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. Red Bull.
Right. Well, and look at like how drinks like 5 Hour Energy, Like that was their way of trying to cut into the Red Bull market or so. Like they were kind of saying, like, you're going to have energy, but it's going to be contained. Like, so it was like a different take. It was more like quick energy that dissipates. They had probably done things and people were probably saying, oh, Red Bull, I'm wired like all night. I can't sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, let's make one where it's really just when you're doing an important project or something like that,
you know? Yeah. And so if we can associate that concept to,
yes.
And because it's a whole long process. There's a lot of logical things that happen in, sequential order a lot of times, but a lot of things can go sideways in a hurry. And, there's a lot of different types of people helping business owners sell companies. It could be, someone who's a business broker, who's maybe doing, smaller deals and doing the real estate approach and listing it and having a sale price and, a certain kind of business owner, all the way to lower middle market, which is where we focus on, up to big investment banks. And it's all under the concept of selling this business. And so there's a lot of players out there. There's a lot of different ways you can go about doing it. And, what are your thoughts on the M&A space and differentiation and how we can look at, doing that for our listeners?
Sure. Well, I think that because I worked with some people in your space, most notably the wonderful Scott Bushke, right? Your boss, who I adore. And I noticed, and maybe Scott filled me in on this, that often what people selling their business in the low to middle market space is that it's less about making the most money they can make. They want to make the most money that they can possibly make.
Right.
But it's about making an irreversible business decision. So they're very, very concerned about making a decision that they cannot take. And so Scott and I talked a lot about this, that they probably built their business and they're probably brilliant at their business through trial and error. Anyone who's really good at a business is really expert at trial and error, whether they think of themselves that way or not. It reminds me of a quick aside here. Years ago, I read a book by the president of Babson College and two other people. Babson at the time was the highest rated entrepreneurial school in America. And it still is. I don't know if it's highest, but it's in the top 3. And so the head of Babson and these other two writers, they wanted to come up with a reason why serial entrepreneurs, are different than normal people. Like, what is it that makes a serial entrepreneur and how are they different from others? And the one thing they came up with was this, as I remember it. And I'm not sure they use these terms, but I'll use them. Is that they said that a regular person, a non-serial entrepreneur, will try to do a new project or a big business or something like that. They'll use predictive reasoning. That is that they want to start this thing, but they're going to wait until the future lines up like the past did so that they can predict what's going to happen and then do their thing and know exactly what's going to happen ahead of time, right? Prediction. So the only problem with that is if you're trying to do something that's unlike anything you've done before, or you're in a kind of volatile market or a volatile world, that the future will never line up like the past. And so you're going to end up waiting forever. And you think it's about safety. You think it's prudent, but you're actually asking something unreal from yourself and the world. So it's never going to happen. So you're going to stay stuck because of predictive reasoning. They said serial entrepreneurs actually have a very different kind of reasoning. They have a goal. And then they say, what is the smallest step I can make? What's the smallest bet I can make, right, with money What can I do? And then once I get there, I'll stop and I'll look around and I'll see how I might reconfigure things. And then what's the next smallest step I can take and afford to lose on? So serial entrepreneurs take a lot of steps that they can afford to lose on, but they just look around after each step and potentially recalibrate what it is that they're doing in order to get to the goal. So essentially, serial entrepreneurs, trial and error and failure are built into what it is that they do, right? Like that's the essential. And I got so caught up in telling my story that I forgot what the point I was going to with A firms. What
No,
was it?
we were just talking about where you work with Scott and how to differentiate.
Yeah. So it's this idea that oh yes, I remember. And this was Scott. This was, I believe, Scott's idea. Like it's this idea of so, but I tell you this story to provide context. It's that the very things that allowed you to have a thriving business, the kinds of businesses that your listeners represent, like the very things that got you there won't get you to an A sale.
Yeah.
Because people think so they succeed through trial and error. But when you get to selling your business, it's no longer a trial and error market. It's you better do this right
Yep.
the first time because it's irreversible and you likely will not get a second chance. And so it's very important that you let the marketplace and buyers know that you understand what it is that they're putting on the line there, and that you have this enormous background in working with people like them. And you have safeguards in place to make sure that the right deal gets done. And by the way, that the right deal might be no deal.
Right.
You know, like when, so it's, you want to show people that you're not just there like wheeling and dealing, and it's not all ego on your part, that you understand who they are and you understand how important this is to them. And you've done this a lot of times before and you're cautious.
Yep. You bring up a good point. Our listeners have helped business owners sell many, many companies over their time. And let that be the trial and error that a business owner goes through, and not, instead of you as a business owner trying it yourself, or, talk about the unsolicited offer and what do I do with this? You want to do it right. So work with someone who's done a bunch of these, who's kind of gone through that already for you. And it's going to be to your benefit to go through instead of going at it yourself.
Well, and you just said like the unsolicited offer. So again, a great idea for people in your space is the idea of when you go to sell your own business, you might assume like things will present themselves to you in ways that seem familiar to you, but are not. They are tricks. Like these are landmines being put in your way. So for instance, the unsolicited offer. And then you can explain what the unsolicited offer often is, that it's not what it is you think it is. In the same way, there are other things that appear when you're trying to sell your business that appear one way, but aren't really that way.
Right.
And you still need to be hopeful for the people. And like, we're going to get this done. This is going to be great for you. You're going to love this. But understand that you need to recognize the difference between something to be excited about and to pursue and something that's there strategically to knock you off your game.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today. And, that's and kind of going back to the question of just differentiation and M&A too, part of, Cornerstone International Alliance is we have 35 firms in our group. and they all run the same type of process in 35 different ways, essentially. And so there is a lot of variance in how, a person or a firm can, attack a sale or working with a client or things like that. What are some things that you've, and clients you've worked with or other things that would be relevant to, and are you talking about like you helping and we talked about, what you and Scott worked on, and it's this concept, this idea, this thing, this big sexy idea that you can go in on. And are you talking about like, we even talk about, keynote speaking, pitching your clients, putting your, you talk about how to talk about your company so people actually care.
Right.
And so are you saying like the big sexy idea is kind of the thing that all of your pitches, your speeches, your branding, your messaging goes around?
It's the thing that's going to get your foot in the door.
Okay.
So last year I did a TEDx talk with over 1.2 million views. So it's done very well. It's called Using the Obvious to Stand Out in Life and Business. And one of the things that I talk about in the TEDx talk is, and then I'll relate this to what everyone's listening. At first, it's going to be, what's this have to do with M&A? But I talk about in the 12th century, they built a tower, and the name of that tower was the Tower of Pisa. Now, the Tower of Pisa was just supposed to be a bell tower in a church. And so there may have been people who visited it, but how many people visit a bell tower? Like, how many millions of bell towers are there on planet Earth? And like, people don't go out of their way. Like, they like hearing the bell if they're around there, but they're not really paying attention to the bell tower. But because of a flaw in the foundation, an unintentional flaw in the foundation, the tower started to lean as they were building it. Like, it was never straight at any point. And they built it, and when they finished it, they thought they had a disaster. And it leaned 5 degrees over, which for a tower that tall, I forget how tall it was, like 17 stories or something like that. For something that tall leaning over that far, you'd think that's a catastrophe. But that flaw made it into a sensation. And so that was 850 odd years ago that tower was created. And even today, it gets millions of visitors a year and makes it gets thousands of visitors a year and makes millions of dollars still today. And that's because it was something worth talking about. Seth Godin, the wonderful marketer, calls the idea of being remarkable something worthy of being remarked upon. So you might say that the Leaning Tower had nothing to do with the tower's functionality, but it was something that everyone to this day wants to come to see. So whatever it is you have in your business, need that. And by the way, that's another idea of being illogical.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's a bell tower. It's there to tell people when there's church services or there's funerals or whatnot. But the fact that it's leaning over and like there was a flaw in it, but it's not falling down and it's that tall, like that's crazy. So sometimes the thing that makes you stand out doesn't really have a logical reason around things. But we were talking about with Scott and Cornerstone. So in working with Scott, the interesting thing is Scott and you guys are so expert in every part of the situation that it's like, and he was talking about all these things in great detail, and you could tell he was a master of all of them. Like, he just knows every single part of the business to a degree that I rarely encounter people who are that expert at what it is they're doing. But I was wondering, there was one thing that he was talking about that was to me different than as an outsider. Like, as someone who would come to the churchyard to see the thing lean, It's like I was an outsider. I'm not caught up in all that stuff.
Yep.
So I'm listening to him, and the thing that I thought was interesting was the fact that he would run a process to get multiple offers. And it was that multiple offer thing that I realized for his business, at least, was the engine of everything, because it justified all the other stuff he was talking about was process or claims, like, all these different things that other people. But Scott really understood how to create multiple offers. So what we came up with for him, and he has this like trademarked and all this stuff, right? Can't use it. He has it. But he's getting amazing mileage out of it now.
Yeah.
The idea of POMO, the power of multiple offers. And so a lot of what Scott does now is he talks about, like, we're going to promise you this, and you need to look out for this. And the thing that makes it all happen is POMO. It's the power of multiple offers. And here's why. When you have too few offers, blah, 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 more offers. And a thing that I had Scott do, which he's really doing amazingly, is I said, I want you not just to be about multiple offers in the world of M&A. I want you to become like the world's expert. That's his lean. That's his tilt. Like, I want you to become the world expert in how businesses and industries, all the different ways they use multiple offers to generate people. So, for instance, an important part of his work is with the NFL. Like, because he's a huge Packers fan, as everyone knows. Anyone who knows Scott knows he's a huge Packers fan. And he has season tickets and so forth. But this is, and by the way, everything I'm saying here is through Scott's research. So the NFL draft day used to be in the 60s. It would be held in a hotel ballroom in like the Hilton in New York City. And it would be like, I don't know, I'm making up the number, like 80 guys sitting in a room with like the protector with their pencils and so forth. It was a very engineering state, like imagine early 1960s. It was a very quiet, it was essentially like a spreadsheet kind of event. It was, right? It was pure, it was nothing. It would be like if you were doing your taxes. You would not think to have lots of people watch you do your taxes.
Right.
That's how the NFL treated it. It was like they were doing their taxes. It was not a big, it was just a process thing. And then someone got the idea years later, why don't we open this up for bidding for different cities? Let's hold it in different places and let's charge for it. And so today, the NFL, I think the figure that Scott identified was that the NFL does something like they make $2.5 billion a year from the draft.
Wow.
Not from the NFL, just from that. So it's now their second biggest monetary draw from the Super Bowl. It's Super Bowl and then draft day. So they took essentially doing their taxes to making $2.5 billion a year and getting people excited by it and whatnot. So Scott is expert at how do you get that many people? How do you use a multiple offer format, do it? And so when he speaks to people in the M&A space, he has greater, right? He has greater cred with them because he can not only identify how it works in your industry, but the idea that he can tell stories and borrow strategies from other places to make yours even more robust. Right? Makes sense. So that would be a big, sexy idea.
It's a big, sexy idea. POMO. Yep.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you guys were working together. You had Scott just talk about what he does. You're listening for, things that you can kind of latch onto, or, this could be something interesting. And is that kind of how, obviously there's a lot more that goes into that, but is that kind of how, working with yourself, and is that kind of coming up with a big, sexy idea, that kind of the process?
Yeah. So we don't know where your main point of differentiation is going to come from.
Right.
Because it's something that the marketplace hasn't seen yet. So I have ideas on where it can come from because I've been doing this for 25 years, but we don't know exactly. So to me, all starting points are equally valid. So essentially, when I'm working with people, the way I often begin is I ask them, okay, when were you born? Where were you born? What was it like growing up? What did you major in school? What were your biggest successes growing up? What were your biggest failures? Where did you go to college? What was your degree in? Do you have a doctorate? What was your doctorate in? What was the title
Yeah.
of your thesis? I'm not saying you need to have a thesis to differentiate, but I just ask all kinds of questions that take you very far afield. And it's like, how did you start this business? What is it? What was surprising to you when you started this business that you didn't? Because to me, it's very, very important to look at what's obvious, to look at stories, to look at surprises, because surprises are where the action is. Surprises mean that people's expectations were defeated. They expected things to go one way and they went a different way. And so I pay a lot of attention. I don't necessarily say this to people, but I'm always looking for something surprising. So it's like, what can clients do after working with you that they couldn't do before working with you? And we look over people's websites and we deconstruct them. Another example, I was working with a large client a few years ago, and we had already been working a month or 2 months on their stuff. And I looked at their website, and on an inner page, it wasn't on the homepage or anything, there was a picture of stadium seating with people sitting there listening to someone. And I said, "Where is this from?" And they said, and I don't remember which client it was or what it is they did, but they said, "Oh, well, that's from our corporate campus. That's an interior show." And I said, "Who are these people?" And I said, "Are these newbies?" And they said, "Some of them are, but a lot of them, everyone who works here is required to take 2 courses a year here on campus on the latest and greatest of whatever the technology is or whatnot." So I said, even if I've been there 20 years, I'm required to do that training. And it's like, "Oh yeah, it's essential." And I said, "So do you tell people about this?" They said, "No, we don't tell anyone about it." I said, "Okay." So you have a dedicated educational section, a training section in your organization, and every single person, from the person who cleans the toilets to the C-level person, are required to do 2 one-week training sessions there on what's new in the field and what's coming in the field and whatnot. I think you should substantiate that and tell that to people, that I think that they would find that a benefit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what it is I'm saying, Nick, is very often, because we don't know exactly what we're looking for ahead of time, they're staying too logical. They're just looking at what other people have said.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have been an example. No one in their industry had that training facility. So when they looked out at other people, no one else was saying that they train their people twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't even think to say it.
Yeah. I've heard you use the term illogical and logical and
yes,
a couple of times. And I think that's a great way to think about this whole thing is, if you're thinking logically, then you're probably, blending in. You're thinking outside the box illogically, right? You're going to differentiate yourself.
Right. Well, and again, anyone listening to this, what you think of as logical probably just means it's the situation that you've inherited, that you've been told by other people, including people who are not as smart as you are. You have been told this is the way things are. And I'm telling you, that is not the way. That is not the way to go. Even if you try to kind of stay in a logical place, you need to approach it with a different kind of color. I mean, here's the thing. Even when your clients, they are not totally logical either. Like, all human beings are illogical, like, confirmation bias and all these different things, that we think that we're being very, very logical and scientific about things. It's just often we just do things based on preconceived notions and dominant ideas that we've come to believe or whatnot. So know that your clients are not measuring things too carefully from like a scientific, so they might hire you, like they're going to assume that you're competent to begin with. They need a little substantiation of that, but they assume that if you've been in business for a while, that you're competent already. And it might be some like small piece of color that pushes them over the edge in using you over using someone else. You know what I mean? Like a sports team you like or something.
Yeah.
Like it's just like I just know that that's like I remember when my wife and I when we first were married, one of the reasons why we moved into the first apartment that we moved in, it was a rental, was that there was a super cool outdoor sculpture across the street from it. And I just remember saying, great, I want to be near that sculpture. Let's take this apartment.
Yeah.
You can say that's a stupid reason to take an apartment, but I'm telling you, right, that's what happens all the time. The car you drive, you are probably driving it for an illogical reason. Like I could almost guarantee it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like for instance, I only buy Jeeps. And one of the reasons why I love Jeeps so much is because I grew up in the 1960s. So I'd watch TV shows like Rat Patrol and I'd watch movies like Patton and whatnot. And they were doing all these amazing things on the battlefield. They were chasing Rommel and they were doing all these things. And they weren't doing it in like a Chevy Impala.
Yeah.
Or they weren't doing it like in a Cadillac.
Mm-hmm.
Like Patton was not standing up in a Cadillac addressing the Third Army. They were in Jeeps. So like to me growing up, like a Jeep was this heroic car. It was an indestructible car. It could go up and down sand dunes and whatnot. So I buy Jeeps and I run them into the ground 200,000 miles because to me, that's what makes a Jeep a Jeep. Like a Jeep with 5,000 miles is not a Jeep. Like you gotta like beat it up. And you can say that it's irrational, like, but everyone with their car. I remember when I was the chief marketing officer of an Inc. 5000 experiential branding company, the CFO, he would always get, I forget what car, I think he would always, every year, he would get a new Lamborghini. He would lease them. He would always have a new Lamborghini. And I asked him why he did that. And he said, oh, because they can go 220 miles an hour, 240 miles an hour. Well, I remember once when he told me he got a ticket for doing 40 in a 30 mile an hour zone. So like, why does the fact that it can do 240 matter to you when doing 40 gets you a ticket? Like, in other words, it's illogical. There's just something about being in a Lamborghini that he loved. It was illogical.
Yeah. How many sand dunes you driving your Jeep up?
Right. Exactly. Right. Like off-road to me means like I've drifted over to the shoulder, you know, because it's dark out or whatnot. That's really I go over no sand dunes. That's right.
That's funny. One last question, Mark. For you. And so we talked about, you know, the big sexy idea, differentiating yourself, thinking illogically to help, you know, stand out. Why, you know, would you recommend our listeners think about this concept? What's it going to do to that for them and help them? And what can, you know, what is the why as to, you know, what they should do here?
Yeah. Well, differentiation, I'll put it bluntly. Anyone listening to this, you have no choice but to differentiate. There's over 8 billion of us on planet Earth. There are tens of millions of businesses or hundreds of millions. And every day we hear hundreds of marketing messages each and every day, day after day after day. So there's a lot of competition for people's attention. Differentiation or standing out in a meaningful way to someone. If you're doing well now, that's not going to continue. Like as more and more marketing and businesses and like these personal brands appear, you're just not going to have any option. And again, I had mentioned Seth Godin before. I think this is another Seth idea. It's the idea that all the boring spots are taken. So if you try to stand out by just doing like their you know, box is red and ours is blue, that's boring. No one is going to be talking about it. So you really are going to have to create something that actually sticks with people and makes them want to have a conversation about you and what it is you do, even when you're not around. And that's how you're going to get business to come to you.
Yeah. I mean, you think about you're pitching a business owner and they're bringing on 5 other firms. You're all pitching for the same thing. how are you going to differentiate yourself amongst those 5 other firms? And that's kind of where you're talking about, like, come up with this concept. What's, when they're going to remember you when you're not in the room, kind of thing.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's like if you don't have a genuine way to stand out from those 4 other firms around you, and I mean a way that makes sense to the customer,
Right.
then, and don't snow yourself. Like I find that people sometimes they inhale their own fumes, as they say, and they come up with these points of differentiation, and they're not real. Like I have a background, like I've had to be in places to create differentiation in hostile environments where no one has a reason to be nice to you. And so it's the exact same thing. You really need to look at the work you're doing. Like imagine no one knows me whatsoever. What's going to get them excited about speaking to me, even if they have no predilection to want to know me to begin?
Yeah. And that's, and so if, where can our listeners learn about you, Mark? Where can they find out about, and how can maybe they connect with you to, maybe they want to start this conversation?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my website is levyinnovation.com. That's Levy innovation with no S at the end.com, or Mark at levyinnovation.com is my website. And I'm happy to talk to people, like have a Zoom call. And it's more that I'm listening. Like if you call me, I'm not going to do much selling, but I'm going to ask you questions and I want to listen very closely to the goal that you may have, but you just don't realize it.
That sounds amazing, Mark. Thank you so much for joining the show here today. I've learned a lot. You've piqued my interest. Maybe you and I got to talk offline too.
That's awesome, Nick. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate it.
Make sure to like, share, and comment on this episode. Pass it on to anybody you think might benefit from our conversation, which is probably everybody, because we all can differentiate ourselves. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure that you get those notifications when a new episode is live, which is typically every Thursday morning. Until next time, everybody, take care. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind Podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.